continue to put people into office. And that even means some of our skinfolk, who definitely are not our kinfolk, such as Byron Donalds, who are gonna continue to say that, like, I mean, the fact that you sitting around talking about life was better under Jim Crow? Like, is this because you don't understand history? Or literally it's because you married a white woman, and so you think that whitewash you? I'm not really sure. She called him out on national TV, questioning his connection to the black community. And when he fired back, neither of them expected the country to explode with opinions. 5 seconds. The stage manager's voice cracked across the studio floor like a whip. But neither Jasmine Crockett nor Byron Donalds flinched. They were already locked in. Eyes narrow, shoulders squared, lips tight with whatever was about to come out of them. Behind the cameras, producers stood still, watching like people waiting for a storm they could feel in their bones. They didn't have to wait long. Representative Crockett, you have the floor. It was meant to be a calm segment. A discussion on recent policy proposals. A few respectful jabs, then on to the next headline. But anyone who'd been watching politics in the last year knew these two were sitting on a powder keg. Hold up, did you think this was just another TV debate? This wasn't about policies or soundbites. This was personal, messy, and about to shake the nation. Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman from Dallas, was known for her sharp tongue and her refusal to let anyone left, right, or center skirt around tough issues. She didn't go for theatrics. She went for jugulars. Byron Donalds, Florida's Republican rising star, carried himself with a blend of preacher-like passion and business-class composure. He could go from laughing to lashing in a heartbeat. And lately, he'd been saying things that sparked more than applause, they lit fires. A week earlier, at a conservative forum in Tampa, Donalds had said something that stuck. Talking about policies that uplifted black families. He said, during Jim Crow, the black family was more unified than it is now. We had values back then, tighter communities, stronger homes. The room clapped, but the clip didn't stay in Tampa. It rocketed across timelines and cable networks. And Jasmine Crockett saw it. She didn't just see it, she felt it. It gnawed at her like an old wound being poked. And when the producers of America at the Crossroads called, inviting her to appear opposite Donalds for a national conversation on race and responsibility, she didn't hesitate. Absolutely, she said. But I'm not coming to be polite. Now, here they were, Washington, D.C., live, millions watching. Congressman Donalds, she started, voice cool as a blade. You said something that sounded like nostalgia for Jim Crow. Do you know how wild that sounds? Donalds looked directly at her, no blink, no smirk. What I said, he replied, measured. Was that despite the injustices of that era? Our communities, our families, had structure. We weren't waiting on government handouts. We were building. You're a grown man, romanticizing one of the darkest chapters in American history. She shot back. People were lynched, Byron. Shot for walking on the wrong side of the street. Your structure came with chains. The moderator tried to step in, but Crockett kept going. And I have to ask, she added, eyes narrowed. Do you think the way you talk about black experience is shaped by your proximity to whiteness? Because, from where I sit, it seems like your marriage. Your choices, they've put you in rooms where you no longer see us the same way. That was it. Donalds leaned forward, his voice dropping a notch. So now you're saying I'm not black enough because I married someone who's not black? I'm saying, she said, more quietly now, that you speak about things like pain and history and struggle like they're ideas. But for some of us, they're memories. You're sitting in comfort built on distance. Gasps echoed in the control room. On Twitter, the clip was already being clipped and captioned. But inside the studio, the tension wasn't viral yet, it was alive, breathing. This wasn't just about a heated exchange. It was about to get personal, messy, and national. There was a pause, just a second or two. But long enough to feel the weight of it. Byron Donalds sat still, one hand resting on the desk in front of him. His jaw clenched for the briefest moment, not out of anger, but control. The kind you develop from years of being tested. Talked over, and told you weren't the kind of black man people expected. "I've never disrespected your experience," he said. "But you don't get to define mine." The host stayed silent, knowing the moment was bigger than any need for moderation. "You talk about struggle like I forgot it," he continued. "Like I didn't grow up in Crown Heights. Like I didn't have cousins doing time. Like I didn't bury friends before I hit college. You think because I married a white woman, I can't carry all that with me?" Crockett leaned back slightly, not retreating, calculating. "Let me be real with you, Byron," she said, voice steady. "It's not about who you love. It's about what you say with the platform you've been given. When you go on national stages and make it sound like black families were better off under Jim Crow. You're not talking like someone who buried friends. You're talking like someone trying to score points." Donald shook his head, breathing slowly. "You want to talk platforms?" he said. "You have one too, Jasmine. And every time you use it to accuse people like me of betrayal. You make it harder for us to have any kind of honest conversation." She didn't flinch. "There's a difference between honesty and revision," she said. "You can't rewrite oppression to make it sound like empowerment." At that moment, something shifted. The studio lights didn't change, but the mood did. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was two lives colliding. Two people shaped by two very different paths. Both trying to speak for a community that refuses to be spoken for as if it's one voice. And the internet was listening. Clips were flying across social media. One tweet read, "Jasmine Crockett just said what nobody's been brave enough to say to Byron Donalds' face." Another shot back, "Disgusting. She used his wife to attack him." Race baiting at its worst. Back in the control room, a young producer named Lennox whispered, "They're gonna be talking about this for days." Meanwhile, on set, the host finally stepped in. "I want to thank both of you for your passion." But Crockett raised a hand. "I'm not done." She turned back to Donalds. "When you say things like what you said in Tampa, it does damage, not to me, not to you, but to the kids who hear that and start thinking maybe Jim Crow wasn't that bad. That maybe their ancestors were stronger because they endured it. That maybe the price of peace is silence." Her voice cracked slightly on the word kids. "My grandfather wasn't strong because of Jim Crow," she said. "He was strong in spite of it." Donalds didn't speak, not yet. Something in her tone had shifted the atmosphere again. She wasn't jabbing anymore. She was remembering. "He used to keep a notebook," she added. "With names of people in his town who disappeared. That's what structure looked like back then." Silence followed, heavy, honest. Donalds finally spoke. "I don't celebrate Jim Crow. I'm saying we had pride in our families. And maybe, if we stopped tearing each other down every time we had a different take on that, we'd get somewhere." Crockett looked down, breathed out. And for the first time, didn't answer right away. But silence doesn't slow down the internet. And off camera, things were just starting to spiral. As the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, a silence hung in the studio like dust after a demolition. Neither Crockett nor Donalds said a word at first, just deep, measured breaths. The kind you take when adrenaline's still pulsing. But the fight, at least for now, is over. The host stood, mumbled a quick thank you that barely cut through the thick tension, and exited stage left like he wanted no part of what came next. Staffers moved cautiously, no high-fives, no congratulations. Just awkward glances and the shuffle of papers being stacked faster than necessary. Jasmine gathered her notes, hands steady but jaw clenched. Her aide, Dana, appeared at her shoulder, whispering, "That clip is already everywhere, trending #2 on Twitter." Jasmine didn't even look up. "What's #1? Your name." Across the room, Byron stood with his back turned. Phone already lighting up with texts. One from his wife, Marlene, read, "Call me now. I'm fine, just saw it." Another came from an old friend in Philadelphia. "They're coming for you hard, man. Brace yourself." He didn't respond. He scrolled. He watched. In under 15 minutes, the segment had been spliced, edited, and uploaded to 5 different platforms. One conservative blog headlined it, "Democrat attacks GOP rep over interracial marriage." A progressive thread on TikTok called it, "Jasmine Crockett delivers a masterclass in black authenticity." And the comments? They weren't just passionate, they were vicious. "You married a colonizer, and it shows. She had no right to drag his wife into this. Trash. This is why we never get ahead, we turn on our own." Crockett and Donalds had walked into a conversation. Now they were inside a storm. Back in her hotel room, Jasmine dropped her bag onto the floor and let her body sink into the edge of the bed. Dana stood by the door, still glued to her phone. "Your district's on fire for you," she said. "But you've got anchors already lining up interviews. One network wants you to do a segment with Charlemagne. Another's asking if you'll go head-to-head with Candace Owens next week." Jasmine didn't respond. She stared out the window. "Did I cross the line?" Dana blinked. "You were honest. That's all people ask for." "That's not what I asked." Dana hesitated. "You hit a nerve. That's not always a bad thing." Meanwhile, in a quiet rental car headed for Reagan National Airport, Byron sat in the back seat while his assistant read a list of scheduled appearances. "The Heritage event in Jacksonville is still confirmed. But they've requested you avoid the family topic if possible. And there's a group of faith leaders in Lakeland who want a statement from you." Byron exhaled, long and low. "It's never about what I say. It's always about how people hear it." His assistant nodded. "Especially when it's her saying it back to you on live TV." He turned toward the window, eyes tracing the lights of the city. He no longer trusted to tell the truth straight. "It's funny," he said quietly. "I didn't even mention my wife. But that's the part people are stuck on. That's what they'll run with, not the part about community or values. Because people feel what they want to feel." The assistant said, "The rest is just noise." By midnight, every major outlet had aired clips of the showdown. Editorials were being drafted. Think pieces were born. Civil rights scholars weighed in. Relationship therapists were invited onto news panels. Somehow, this wasn't just about Crockett and Donalds anymore. It was about every marriage, every cultural divide, every wound we never stitched up properly. But in the middle of that firestorm, two people, two human beings with lived experiences, were left staring at screens, wondering who exactly they were to each other now. But things hadn't reached their boiling point yet. Because the real divide was only just beginning to show. The next morning, Crockett's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. She'd already silenced it, flipped it face down, and buried it under a stack of folders. It didn't matter. The notifications buzzed against the wood like a woodpecker on a caffeine high. She sat in her office in D.C., staring blankly at a framed photo of her parents. Her father had marched in Louisiana when he was 15. Got arrested twice. Never spoke about it like he was a hero. Just said, "We did what we had to." A voice broke her thoughts. "Your 10 a.m.'s here." It was Alton Briggs, a local activist from Denton County. Big presence, bigger opinions. He sat across from her with his signature felt hat and a printed-out photo of her and Donalds on live TV. "You spoke truth," he said, tapping the photo. But that last line about his wife? That's the one they're using to drag you. Jasmine crossed her arms. You think I regret it? I think you need to own it or clarify it. Otherwise, they'll define it for you. She didn't answer right away. Meanwhile, Byron Donalds was getting hit from a different angle. He'd flown back to Florida late the night before and stepped straight into a town hall in Ocala. It was supposed to be a low-stakes Q&A with local voters, nothing fancy. But the second he walked in, he could feel the temperature. First question, do you really think Jim Crow had redeeming value? Second, why didn't you defend your wife more directly? Third, how can you talk about values when you're attacking black women? Byron tried to keep it together. I'm not defending segregation. I never would. I'm talking about the internal strength of our families back then. My words were twisted. A man in the back stood up. Nobody twisted anything. We heard you. We heard you loud and clear. Backstage, after the event, Byron sat with Marlene, who'd driven down from their home in Naples. She was composed, but her eyes were sharp. I don't need you to defend me, she said. But you can't pretend this didn't hit our house. Byron, I walked into the grocery store. And someone asked me if I felt responsible for your disconnect. That's the word they used, disconnect. Byron didn't know what to say. That interview made me feel like a symbol, she said. Not your partner. He looked at her, heart aching. Because in all the noise, he'd forgotten the person who'd stayed up with him through law school nights and long campaign drives. And now she was hurt. Because the world turned her into a talking point in a debate she never asked to be part of. Elsewhere, in a high school classroom in Tulsa, a government teacher paused the lesson and played the full interview for her students. One of them, a girl named Kendra, raised her hand. My grandma always said some black folks forget where they came from. Once they get a little shine, she said. Another student, Miles, shook his head. That's not fair. Just because he married someone white doesn't mean he forgot anything. And so the cycle spun: living rooms, classrooms, churches, Twitter threads, radio shows. Every American with a TV or a phone suddenly had a take. And most of them came with heat. Meanwhile, Jasmine walked down a quiet hallway inside the Capitol, heels clicking softly, when she noticed Byron approaching from the opposite end. Neither slowed down. Neither swerved. They stopped when they were face to face. You got a second? He asked. She nodded. They stepped into an empty side room, neutral ground. I didn't mean to question your family, Jasmine said. But I had to question what you said. Byron nodded slowly. And I didn't mean to make excuses for a system that crushed people. I was trying to talk about what we lost. Maybe I didn't say it right. There was a long beat of silence. Maybe, she said, or maybe you said it how you felt. But feelings can do damage too. He looked at her. So what now? She shrugged. We deal with the aftermath. But outside that room, the aftermath wasn't slowing down. It was spreading, and the nation was choosing sides faster than either of them could catch up. 2 days later, the world hadn't cooled off, it had gotten louder, angrier, and more divided. Cable news ran round-the-clock analysis. Panels filled with political strategists, former civil rights leaders, and morning show anchors. All trying to decode what had just happened. Not the policy debate, not the legislative back and forth. But that moment, the look Jasmine gave. The pause before Byron responded. The sharp exchange about proximity and perception. In Birmingham, Alabama, Pastor Reginald Knox used his Sunday sermon to weigh in. We are watching two people fight over a mirror, he said, pacing slowly down the aisle of his small church. Both of them holding it up to the other, saying, look at what you've become. But nobody wants to look at themselves. Some members nodded, some folded their arms. A few just stared straight ahead. Over in Sacramento, California, at a family cookout, a young man named Jarrell replayed the viral clip on his phone, arguing with his aunt and older cousin. She was out of line, straight up. "You don't bring someone's wife into it," he said. His cousin Regina snapped back. "If you put yourself on national TV saying Jim Crow had any upside, you can't act surprised when people come for your whole worldview." "He didn't say it was good," Jarrell countered. "He said black families had more structure." "Ain't that kind of true?" Their aunt threw up her hands. Truth without context is still a lie. The country had entered the part of the cycle where things stopped being about what was said and started being about what it meant, what it exposed, what it touched in people, and what it reminded them of. Meanwhile, Jasmine's office was flooded with requests. Some were praise, "Thank you for standing up for our pain." Others were hostile. One voicemail simply said, "Keep your mouth off good black men." In Tallahassee, Donald sat with his 17-year-old son, Brandon, on the back porch. Both of them drinking lemonade and watching the sun slip behind the trees. Brandon hadn't said much the last few days, but now he turned toward his father. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why didn't you just say you messed up?" Byron blinked. Brandon continued, "I know what you meant, but the way you said it didn't sound like love. It sounded like a dig." Byron stared at the railing in front of them. The grooves in the wood. The quiet that finally felt honest. "I didn't want to give them a soundbite," he said. "You already did." That hit harder than expected. In a community center in Jackson, Mississippi, a group of high school seniors held a debate of their own. Topic: Does lived experience justify hard truths? Half the room sided with Crockett, the other half with Donalds. But for the first time in that program's history, nobody chose to sit out. The story had become more than two politicians arguing. It had become a proxy for every uncomfortable conversation families had been avoiding for generations. About who gets to speak for whom. About how we define loyalty. About whether it's possible to see the world differently without being branded a traitor. And somewhere deep inside the Capitol, Jasmine Crockett sat with her comms director, reviewing their latest statement draft. "I'm not walking anything back," she said. "But I'll clarify." The director nodded. "Wanna read it out loud?" She picked up the paper. "I questioned a colleague's perspective, not his family. But I recognize that our personal lives can influence how we speak and how we're heard. My goal is to advocate for truth, not to attack the people we love. I stand by the need to challenge romanticized views of oppression. But I also respect the complexity of identity and experience." She set it down. "It's real enough." At the same time, Donalds was drafting his own response, shorter, firmer. "I spoke from personal conviction and historical memory. I never meant to minimize the pain of the past, only to highlight the strength within our people. Dialogue should be difficult, it means we're being honest. I welcome disagreement, but not at the expense of dignity. But for all the statements, the interviews, the analysis, what the public really wanted was one thing neither of them had given yet: vulnerability." Late Thursday afternoon, Jasmine Crockett stood just outside the Library of Congress, waiting for the cameras to be set up. The sun was low, casting that golden hour glow. People usually chase for family photos, not public apologies. But this wasn't a photo op, not for her. CNN had invited both her and Donalds to do separate interviews. But fate, or maybe ratings, had brought their crews to the same place. The same day, almost the same hour. She hadn't seen Byron since that quiet moment in the Capitol hallway. She was adjusting her mic when she saw him, walking up the steps slowly, talking with his comms person. A white guy in a navy suit who kept checking his watch. Byron looked tired, not defeated, just weathered. Like someone who'd been through more than a news cycle. Their eyes met, no cameras, no staffers close enough to eavesdrop. Just two public servants, two humans standing between chaos and quiet. "You up next?" he asked, voice even. She nodded. "You just finished?" A pause. "I read your statement," he added. She raised an eyebrow. "And I don't agree with all of it, but I respected it." He wasn't trying to score points. It was the way he said it, soft, almost grateful. She glanced down at her phone, where alerts were still rolling in. "I think people want us to hate each other," she said. "Some of them need us to," he replied. "And if we don't, they lose their headline." Another beat of silence. Then she spoke, almost reluctantly. "You were right about one thing," she said. "We are too quick to tear each other down." He exhaled, relieved and maybe surprised. "And you were right about something too," he admitted. "Pain doesn't belong in museums. It's still living in people's bones." "I forgot that when I spoke." She looked at him, not as an opponent, not as a soundbite, but as a man. "You didn't forget," she said. "You just didn't say it out loud." The moment hovered between them like a thread no one wanted to pull too tight. Down below, their aides waited. The next set of questions, the next angles, the next storm. But for once, the country wasn't watching. There were no cameras to spin what was said next. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked, suddenly. "Every day," he said. "But I signed up for this." "Same," she whispered. Then, finally, something that hadn't happened in weeks. Jasmine smiled. "I still think you need to read more history," she said, half joking. He chuckled. "And I still think you're allergic to nuance." They laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. In that quiet moment, something broke, not like a crack, but like a release. All the pressure, the headlines, the noise just paused. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't resolution. But it was something better than war. Later that night, after the interviews aired, the internet didn't buzz as loudly. Commenters were confused. Did they just talk? Wait, no clapback? No apology tour? But something strange happened. A few people started sharing their own stories. A woman in Memphis tweeted, "My dad was like Donalds, my mom like Crockett. I never thought I'd see their worlds meet." This hit hard. A high schooler from St. Louis wrote, "I showed my grandma the clip. She just said, 'Maybe we'll be okay.'" And in small towns, cities, barbershops, and backyards, the conversation changed. Not everyone agreed, they weren't supposed to. But something had shifted. Because when two people stop fighting long enough to see each other clearly, it makes it harder for the rest of us to hide behind outrage. But real change doesn't come from viral clips. It comes from what we choose to carry forward after the noise dies down. By the time the weekend arrived, the headlines had begun to fade. The video clips slowed. Commentators moved on to the next controversy. But something quieter lingered. In households across the country. Black, white, multiracial, conservative, progressive, and everything in between. People kept talking not about who won the exchange. Not about who was right or wrong. But about the gray space in between. The place where people like Jasmine Crockett and Byron Donalds had unexpectedly met. In Baton Rouge, an elderly man named Terrence Callow pulled his grandson aside after dinner. "You saw that thing on TV with those two?" he asked. The boy nodded. "Yeah, everyone's been posting it." Terrence rubbed his chin. "When I was your age, we didn't have politicians who talked to each other like that. They didn't always have to agree. But they had the guts to say what they really felt. And sometimes to listen too." "Do you think they really listened?" Terrence paused. "They tried. That's more than most." Meanwhile, in Washington, Jasmine Crockett sat at her kitchen table with a mug of black tea, flipping through messages from constituents. One from a woman in El Paso caught her eye. I didn't agree with everything you said. But thank you for saying it out loud. Sometimes pain needs to hear itself before it can heal. She stared at it for a moment, then forwarded it to Dana. Across the country, in Naples, Florida, Byron Donalds walked along the shoreline with Marlene, their hands brushing now and then like muscle memory trying to reconnect. I think I let my message get louder than my meaning, he said. She squeezed his fingers gently. Maybe, but you also let people see you. Even if they didn't like what they saw. They stopped, watched a group of kids building a sandcastle too close to the tide. Byron turned to her. Would you do it again? Marry you, she teased. No, live through that kind of public heat. She smiled. We're still here, aren't we? In their own corners of the country. The two representatives returned to their lives. The bills, the committees, the town halls. But something had changed. They didn't have to agree. They didn't have to hug it out on camera. But the next time their names came up in the same breath, the temperature was different. Colleagues started asking Jasmine what it took to have hard conversations that didn't end in slander. Byron began showing up to roundtables he once avoided. The tension hadn't vanished, but respect had taken root in its place. And maybe that's the best we can hope for sometimes. Not perfect unity, not instant peace, but a willingness to face the discomfort, hold the silence, and keep going. Because here's the truth most people don't want to admit. Growth hurts. It doesn't trend. It doesn't make for clean headlines. But it matters. What Crockett and Donalds gave us, intentionally or not, was a window into what it means to be deeply human in the public eye. To feel misrepresented, to feel misunderstood. To lash out, to listen, and to grow. Not for a camera, not for applause. But because they had to. Because people were watching. And maybe because the country needs it more than it knows. So here's the question for you watching right now. What conversations have you been avoiding? What truths have you been softening to protect someone else or to protect yourself? What would happen if you finally said it out loud? We don't grow by staying quiet. We grow by speaking up. By staying in the room. By not walking away when it gets messy. So the next time you find yourself disagreeing with someone, especially someone who looks like you, who came from where you came from, ask yourself this. Am I trying to win, or am I trying to understand? Because those aren't the same thing. And maybe, if more of us chose understanding, even when it's hard, we wouldn't need to wait for politicians to do it first. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think, take a second to subscribe, share it, start a conversation. That's how we move forward. One moment, one voice, one real talk at a time.